And welcome to this session of Life Goals. We're taking a look at the fruits of the Spirit, as sort of a roadmap for how we grow our spiritual life. How do we become more Christ-like? We took a look at growing in love and in joy. And in this week, we're talking about how to grow in peace. Can you just be more peaceful? I know in my home, when people are starting to get excited or agitated or they're amping up, I often just yell out, "Chill out!" But it doesn't work, right? It makes things worse. In fact, when the anxiety level starts to rise and the agitation starts to go through the roof, that's when I go for the slow talk. I say, you need to calm down. But if you know anything about anxiety, you know that is like adding fuel to the fire. It doesn't work. I can't just calm down. So what is Scripture saying when it says to be at peace? That word is used throughout the Scripture, Old Testament to New. We're told that nations are supposed to be at peace. We're told that groups of people should be at peace with each other. We're told not to be afraid, but to have peace. In fact, it's even used as a greeting. Paul will often greet the churches in the New Testament with this. He'll say, "Grace and peace to you." Well, how do we grow in that? Understanding the definition might be a little bit helpful. See, the writers of the New Testament were writing to people in the Greek-speaking world. And they wrote it in Greek. And the Greek definition of peace was pretty clear. Peace were the gaps. They were the breaks in what was otherwise a world of turmoil. They had a constant state of war. And peace were those small breaks in the middle of those wars. So they understood peace in that way. It was the calm time. In fact, that definition rings pretty true to me. In the middle of a crazy life, there are small breaks, just little windows, and those are what I would call peace. But the writers of the New Testament had something else in mind when they were writing to those churches. See, they were writing from the Hebrew perspective. And in the Hebrew perspective, the word peace meant so much more. They were writing about the word shalom. Shalom is this word for wholeness. It's a word meaning things are as God created them to be. It's the world set right. It is the order of God. Everything is at order. Everything is good. That is shalom. That's the peace of Scripture. And so when they said it, they would say that a nation needs to be in peace, meaning it needs to have God's order. And they would say a group of people needs to have peace. It needs to be an ordered group of people. And then they would look at us and say, we need to have lives that are at peace, lives that are ordered, lives that are good. And so when we look at Scripture and we say, okay, that's something I want to grow in. I'd love to have that kind of order of God in my life. The question is, I don't really know how to get there. One of my favorite writers on this subject is Dallas Willard. He spent a lot of time writing about the fruits of the Spirit and growing spiritually. And he had a famous phrase that he used. He would say, you need to ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. Ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. Now that's a little different than busyness. We all live in a busy world. Busyness is an issue of our calendars. Our calendars get out of order and then we become busy. But hurried is even more than that. Hurried isn't a calendar issue, it's a heart issue. To be a hurried person is to be a person whose heart is out of order. And to help us figure out what to do about that, I want to look at three different pieces, three kind of observations. The first is a clue that comes from the way it's often used in Scripture. It's the greeting, right? So if we were to fly to Israel today and we were to knock on the door of someone and they were to greet us in the Hebrew way, they would give us a big hug and they would say, Shalom, peace. In fact, this idea of peace is very connected to a greeting because peace is connected to the idea of presence. When you arrive, you're greeted with peace. you're present. And when we hear about God's peace in Scripture, we're hearing about God's presence. So when God says, don't be afraid, don't be anxious, have peace, He's not saying that like you have some deficiency in you and you need to grow. In fact, He's saying it like you're a scared child. When one of my kids is scared, I don't say, have peace. Instead, I get down on a knee beside him. I wrap my arm around him and I say, don't worry, Dad is here. And God tells us to have peace in that way, reminding us of His presence. You can begin to look for and practice this presence of God. You can find it often as we gather for worship or as you take a little time in your day for prayer. But you'll also find it if you start to tune your eyes to look for the presence of God, to be aware of God being at work around you. It may come up in a conversation or in the smile of a kid, or you may see it in nature around you, but there are signs of the presence of God all around you. And as you begin looking for the presence of God, you'll start to see it. And as you start to practice this presence of God, you will find that you will realize God being with you starts to order your heart, that you can begin to rest in God and find peace. Now, one practice that we can do is a practice from the ancient church, and it's the practice of solitude. Now, if you're like me, you go, man, solitude? I mean, that's a pipe dream. That's something I'll do when my kids are all grown and when my schedule gets easy. Maybe in retirement, I can have some solitude. Man, after all, I don't want to be a monk and move off to the desert somewhere. But solitude doesn't have to look like that. Solitude can come in just little 5-minute increments, a few minutes in the morning before I start my day. Or maybe at lunchtime, just pulling back and sitting quietly in the presence of God, listening to God, ordering my heart. Or maybe it happens in an evening and I sneak off and lock myself in some room in my house. I've found that these small moments of solitude are actually life-changing for me. I often wake up pretty anxious. A lot of things rumbling around in my head, worries that I have, appointments that are coming up, meetings with certain people or certain agendas that have to be handled or checklists that seems to be endless. I'll wake up and often I'll just grab my phone and head straight into work or grab one of my kids and start working with them. But I've found that instead, if I will just take a couple of minutes before I start into the day and just pray a simple prayer. My prayer looks like this. I go, God, this worry that I have this morning, I give it to you. God, this person I'm meeting with, I give them to you. God, this task that's on my mind, I give it to you. I even pray through my calendar. God, these things that are coming up in my calendar, God, I give each one of those to you. It's real simple. It's not profound at all. But it's this calm, quiet sitting before God. And I've found that as I do that, it begins to order my heart. Solitude may look different for you. You may even need to take a day or two and get away. I know that's hard to do in the busy calendars that we all have, but if it's important, if it brings change, if it starts to bring you peace, my encouragement is you look at that busy calendar and you carve out some time and you find some solitude. Another practice is given to us by Dallas Willard. It's not an ancient practice of the church. It's something I think he just made up. He calls it slowing. To practice slowing. The idea here is a little bit wacky, but it looks like this. Discipline yourself to be slow sometimes. You know, when you're driving down the road and you're always zooming into the fastest lane you possibly can, don't. Get over into the slow lane. Discipline yourself to drive slowly every once in a while. Or even better, go for a walk. Not the kind of walk that you do, the efficient ones, where you're getting in exercise and you've got you're listening to a podcast, so you're growing and you're handling text messages all at the same time because you're such an efficient person. Not that kind of a walk, a stroll, a slow walk. Or even better, this happens to me when I sit down with one of the kids and they want to do a puzzle or play a little game. I can't stand it. I mean, I love them and everything, but it's so slow. They're so inefficient. We'll never get this puzzle done. I just want to fix the whole puzzle for them real quick. But sometimes I need to discipline myself to sit with a child and do a puzzle at their pace. That's in the process of this slowing that I began to realize that I'm less important than I think I am. That God is actually in control and even in control of my life. That I'll never accomplish all the things that I think that I somehow should or that have somehow been put on me to accomplish. Instead, God's in control. And as I begin to slow and reflect and listen, God begins to speak. And as God speaks, I begin to rest. And as I rest, I realize I'm resting in God's presence. And it's in God's presence that I find peace. May you find peace.